Hey there, welcome back to Pepper Geek. In today's video, we'll be sharing how we prepare our garden soil for planting in the spring. So every spring we have a procedure for taking care of our soil and getting it ready for the plants to go into the ground. So we're going to show you all of the different things that we do to make sure that we have a bountiful season. But first, check out our ebook, Growing Perfect Peppers, where we teach you how to grow peppers from seed to harvest, our entire process of growing peppers and getting really productive plants every year. If you're interested, check it out in the link down in the description. Okay, so let's talk about prepping for the spring garden. Every gardener does it differently, but we follow some really basic guidelines to make sure that the soil is healthy and has plenty of nutrients and is ready for the plants when they're ready to go into the ground. And the first thing is, of course, weeding. If you have weeds in your garden, you're gonna wanna pull those out. The earlier in the spring, the better. When the weeds are small, it's much easier to do that. And we like this tool. This is a weeding hoe. It has this blade on the end, and you just sort of work it back and forth just under the surface of the soil, and it cuts at the root. Does a really good job, makes it a lot easier, and you don't have to bend over so much. But even with a tool like that, if you let the weeds get too big, it can be really difficult and you'll end up with blisters on your fingers like me. So start early in the season and you'll be thanking yourself later. If you do have to weed, you want to make sure you get those weeds out of the garden. You don't really want them just sitting on the surface of the soil, and you definitely don't want to work them into the soil, because if those fresh weeds are put under the ground, they'll start to decompose, and you don't want them breaking down in that soil while you're also trying to grow plants in the same spot. So get those weeds pulled and remove them from the garden, and you can compost them if you like. So that leads us to our next topic beautifully, which is compost and adding organic material to the soil. And compost is by far the most common and the best amendment you can add to your soil. And that's because it can improve basically any type of soil. If you have sandy soil, it can help that soil hold on to the moisture. And if you have a really clay-rich soil, it can help the soil drain better. So this is some basic compost. It's municipal compost, so it's basically rotted down leaves from a few years ago. And as you can see, it's just sort of this rich, dark material that crumbles as you move your hand through it. And at its core, it's basically broken down organic matter. You can make your own compost at home, and it's really simple, and it's one of the best things you can add to your garden. We'll also be releasing a video on how to make your own compost at home on our other channel, Geeky Greenhouse. So if you're interested in learning how to make compost, check out Geeky Greenhouse in the description below. If you're buying compost that is in bags, you want to avoid horse manure, because those horses can often feed on hay or straw that has been treated with herbicide, and those herbicides, even over the course of years, sometimes won't break down, and you'll find them in your compost, and it will end up inhibiting the growth of your plants. So avoid horse manure if you can. So in order to apply this to your soil, you just want to add a layer to the surface, between 1 and 2 inches of compost, whatever you can afford to add, and then you can gently rake it into the top of the soil. You don't want to go digging it too deeply. You just want to add it to the surface, and over the course of the season, as you irrigate or as it rains, the nutrients will filter down into the root systems of your plants. And if that's all you're going to do, you're pretty well off right from there, but there are some other things that you can do to improve your soil. If you have raw materials like grass clippings or plants from last season, it's always best to compost them first, but you can add them directly to your soil. You just want to make sure you do that months before you're planting, so that you give them enough time to break down in the soil. If you want a quicker way of adding nutrients to the soil, you can use a slow release granular fertilizer and just work it into the soil the same way you would compost. It may be a little bit cheaper or easier to add those nutrients to your soil, but you're not improving the soil structure the way that compost does by adding bulk and also improving drainage, as we talked about. And beyond that, if this is a new garden or you've had some failures with your soil in the past, it might be a good idea to get a soil test. You can send away a sample of your soil to your local university, and they'll often charge a small fee to tell you all about your soil. You'll learn what nutrients are deficient and how you can improve your pH. So now I want to talk a little bit about working the soil. A lot of people will till their soil or try to loosen up the soil a little bit, and this can be appropriate for a newer garden or a part of your garden that may have become compacted over the years. So what we recommend trying first is using a fork, pitchfork, or a broad fork to just open up the soil a bit. You can just dig down a few inches and just wiggle back and forth like so. That doesn't disturb the microbiome as much as a proper tilling would, and you'll maintain that structure in the soil, which benefits your plants. If the soil is especially compacted over years of trampling or heavy machinery, then you might need to work that soil to open it up and get it plantable again. If your soil has poor drainage, it may be worth it to build up mounds in your garden bed and plant on top of those mounds. So you want to build up sort of a plateau 8 to 10 inches above ground level, and then have troughs between the mounds and plant your plants on top of those mounds. And that will allow the rainfall and the water to drain away from your plants instead of waterlogging those root systems. And after you've planted, we recommend using some type of mulch to keep the water retention in the soil and avoid evaporation from the surface. And it also just helps protect the soil, especially when much of it is otherwise exposed to the sun and the elements. So straw is a good option. Again, you want to be careful with straw because it can also have that herbicide issue where the plants were treated with an herbicide and that persistent herbicide can affect your garden. So make sure you're getting straw or hay from a trusted source. Alternatively, you could use leaf mulch, which is a really great free resource, which we'll be using soon. Essentially, you gather up all the leaves that drop in your area, ask your neighbors for them, and then grind them up with a lawnmower or something like that, and then let that decompose a bit over the winter. And in the spring, you'll have a perfect mulch that is full of nutrients to go around the base of your plants. Not only does mulch provide nutrients slowly as it decomposes, but it also suppresses weeds, which makes gardening a lot easier and more enjoyable over the season. So once you're done preparing your soil for planting, you want to make sure that you avoid walking where your plants and their root systems are going to be growing. That can compact the soil, inhibiting root growth, and also destroying the microbiome that's going on in the soil. So make sure you plan out your pathways in between your plants to not only protect the roots, but also give you plenty of space to harvest and tend to your plants. And one other thing I wanted to mention, in the fall, once your gardening season is coming to an end, it's a good idea to keep your soil protected over the colder months. And you can do that by planting cover crops in the fall season, which are fast-growing plants like peas, beans, clover, and rye. And then you'll work them into the soil at the end of the season, at the very end, giving them time to break down and add nutrients back into the soil. It's basically like composting in place, but there are select crops that do a really good job of adding nitrogen and other nutrients back into the soil. While you're doing all of this, it's of course a really good idea to plan ahead where your plants are going to be planted. The winter months give us the perfect opportunity to plan ahead and know where each plant is going to be located and plan everything out logically. So keep in mind where the plants are going to be located in addition to how you're going to access them. So what do you do to prepare your soil in the springtime? We'd love to learn some techniques from you. Leave them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Pepper Geek while you're here, and our other channel, Geeky Greenhouse, for everything non-pepper related. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.